Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. I hope you are keeping safe during this pandemic. We thought pandemic is over, but it's still with us. We have to deal with that. You're welcome to our webinar today, which is tackling the global water crisis. My name is Dr. Nelson Ogunshakin. I'm the CEO of FIDIC, and it's a pleasure to have you all joining us today on this particular special occasion. We've released three State of the World report this year. This is the third one. And I'm glad that we have close to 600 people registered to join us. Over the last, 18 months, I think it's fair to say that FIDIC has engaged the world of consulting engineering and the infrastructure world in wider sense. We've had in excess of 26 webinars held over the period, with over 20,000 people registered, with 11,000 plus who's participated in the program from over 150 countries, which is pretty incredible. Beyond that, we've had over 19,000 people who has been on our YouTube to watch those programs that we've actually recorded over the last 18 months. And it just gave me a real pleasure to actually introduce you to today's program, which is tackling the global water crisis. Yes, it is a case that we are looking at a number of programs this year. We've looked at our committee, webinar that's been very successful. The next one is on 5th of October. The next State of the World report coming up will be in September, where we are looking at issues about, community. But today we are dealing with tackling, water issue. And on top of that, on 10th and 13th of September, we've our Global Infrastructure Conference coming up. So if you haven't registered, I now advise you very quickly to go and join. Now, it gives me real pleasure, once again, to introduce our President, Bill Howard, President in office, 2019-2021. He's been absolutely fantastic in supporting all our program. So far, he has not missed, and I repeat that, he has not missed one of the webinars. I have missed one. And it gives me real pleasure to invite Bill to give us a welcome and opening speech, because this subject is close to his heart, and really hand over to Bill. Bill, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nelson. And first of all, I'd like to thank you and the Secretariat for putting these webinars on. As you mentioned, this is our 26th webinar that we've conducted during the pandemic. And one of the results of these webinars has been that FIDIC has reached out to over 20,000 people around the world. And that is fantastic. There's an awful lot of people in various countries around the world that understand a lot more about what FIDIC does and our importance than there ever was. And I really hope that we continue to keep that communication and connection open. It's very, very important that we do that. Putting these webinars on under any circumstances is a challenge. But during a pandemic, it's a particular challenge with people working remotely. So thank you very much to the Secretariat and to you, Nelson, for putting these programs on so successfully. I'd also like to thank our speakers today. They are very diverse in a number of ways. They're diverse in age, they're diverse from the countries that they represent, the firms they represent, the type of business they do, diverse in gender as well. And this is extremely encouraging to me, particularly the first one. And that is the diversity of age. I think we've got a lot of younger people involved as speakers and panelists today. And the challenges associated with the water crisis and climate change will unfortunately be with that generation for a long, long time. And the more active that we get professionals from that diverse group, I think the better our chances are. I tell fellow students at my alma mater, Northeastern, that I wish I was their age so I could help tackle these exciting problems. They're frightening in some ways, but they're exciting in others, and they really will create great opportunities for someone to be a water resources engineer in the future. So that's the good part of the challenges that we face. As Nelson mentioned, this is the second webinar that we've conducted focusing on water, and it's tackling the crisis, and that's what we're going to hear about today. I would also refer you to two other state-of-the-world documents. One was produced in 2015 called Water Challenges, which is really a quick read. You can get through it in probably a couple of hours, and I recommend you just take a glance at it once in a while, because some of the things that we mentioned in that 2015 report have in fact come to fruition. And then a few months ago, we did a webinar on the value of water. As many of us know, in some circles, water is undervalued. It's certainly underinvested in. And now we're going to talk today about tackling the crisis. We have all sorts of really neat ideas that have been presented by the panelists and others. And in some ways, they come down to a couple of massive kind of concepts. One is innovation. The estimated cost to deal with some of our problems is absolutely huge, but I am absolutely, totally convinced that professional engineers and the scientific community can reduce these costs dramatically if we're given the chance. We can be unbelievably innovative, and as you will see here today, and as you'll see in the documents that we produce, there are tons of examples of innovation going on all around the world, and we need to do more and more of it. We'll also hear about natural systems. Just because an engineer, a civil engineer, is involved in a project or addressing a challenge does not mean that the solution is going to be concrete and steel. It might well be, but it also might be much better use of natural systems. And we're seeing much, much more of that. All of this takes planning and engineers operating as trusted advisors so that we can tackle as many problems as possible in one project, and ultimately, and most importantly, make sure that whatever we do, we don't fix one problem and create another. And all of those things are easy to say, but they're difficult to do. We're wrapping all of this state of the world concept around the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, primarily Goal 6, which deals with water, and Goal 14 with the oceans, but there are other goals within there are 17 Sustainable Development Goals that are connected as well, but mostly it is goal number 6 that we're focused on. So I'm very excited about this program. As I sort of end my presidency with FIDIC, I'm thrilled that we have made enormous progress with our State of the World initiative. And with that, I'll turn it back to Nelson. I'm looking forward to our great discussion. Nelson.
Thank you very much, Bill, for that very welcoming introduction. And as usual, and as ever, you've given us an insight to what is to be discussed. So I'm not going to spend too much time to try and introduce. Suffice to say, water, water, water. Do we have enough, or we haven't had enough? We've done 3 reports this year. This is the 3rd one. One is about time to invest. Bill mentioned that. And we did that together. We're looking at the demand and the need for infrastructure. Second one was about the value of water. And then the 3rd one is now focusing about how do we look at, the issue of the challenges that goes with, dealing with the crisis. To give it a kickstart, I think it would be a good idea that we just start with a few polls to look at the issues. And the first question is, have the recent cases of flooding and drought been enough to put the seriousness of solving water resources issue on the political agenda? Yes or no? This should be a very simple answer. But if you've listened to the news recently and you've actually watched the news about what's happening in Germany, what's happening in, I think if I've got it right, in China, you would have seen that we have major challenges on our hand. And the question is this very much on a political issue? Do they see it as a political agenda? So it'll be interesting to find out the feedback. I hope everybody fully agree, and we got 75%. That makes practical sense. And then the next question that's going to come through is really about, how do we see it? And I think, if Barbara can put it on. And the question is, natural-based solution being considered enough as part of the current planning process? In another word, are we using a natural base? And is that the way to go forward? And are we using that adequately enough to enable us to find a solution that is sustainable. As Bill said, we need to deliver the sustainability development goals. It's not just 6 only, it's not just 14, but also 17. It'd be interesting to see the feedback. Barbara, do you have the answer to the questions? I think, again, unanimously, 86% said no, we are not using natural resources solution to solve the problem, which means there is a real gap in the market and we need to find a solution. Now, moving forward in terms of where we are, I am not an expert in the hydro and water basin, but I'm a civil engineer. And neither is this young man called Graham an expert, but he is the brain in pulling up all these reports. So it now gives me real pleasure once again to introduce Graham Pontin, who is the head of economic and strategic policy within FIDIC. His responsibility has always been to help us to put the report together, and the report is being contributed in by a great number of talented people all over the world, as Bill mentioned. So Graham, the floor is yours to give us a very quick potted headline of the report, and then we can dive into the report later on. Graham, floor is yours.
Thank you, Nelson. The report today basically revolves around 3 recommendations that are focused on engaging stakeholders and governments across the infrastructure spectrum. It also highlights various projects that have been going on and the innovations and how they link to the SDGs, so very much in line with how the industry is now, but also we have to recognize that technology and practices are still evolving, and over the next few years, over the next 5 years, these will continue to change. Now, to set the scene and start with a reminder of where we're coming from, given that we link the state of the world to the SDGs, I like to do my countdown to begin with. So we've got 3,087 days left now. If you take 20% off the weekends and another year of COVID, we've only actually got 2,105. So we've now got 90 days less than when we did this last time. So as you can see, the situation is quite important and urgent. Setting the scene from the last report, global water demand has increased by over 600% in the last 100 years. Currently, there are 2.7 billion people that have at least 1 month of water scarcity. I mean, that's 30% of the global population. Global demand is expected to increase by 20 to 30% by 2050. There's 500 dead zones in our ocean and they're increasing. And 70% of the world's fresh water is associated with food production. So those are the sorts of things we established in the last report and build off on this report. The investment need over the next years, as we highlighted from the first report, is approximately $2 trillion of the $7 trillion a year we need to invest to try and meet the SDGs. That is a significant challenge and that still exists. So on to today's report. And I do want to do this as quick as possible to hand over to the speakers as they're the experts in solving the problems. It talks about communities and how they interact with water systems, because that's important, embracing concepts of smart water across not only surface water and wastewater and information and things like that. We talk about oceans and the fact that they're a carbon store and whether there's things we can learn from that and what technologies are evolving there. We talk about the water nexus again and how our projects are helping those sort of interaction points and how they can be helped. And then we have a what next section, which could be summarized as a sort of set of 12 why can't we statements. Why can't everyone have access to adequate sanitation? And it sort of puts out the challenge to the industry that actually the short answer is we can, as long as we do more. And as long as we engage engineers and the infrastructure community, we are able to meet these challenges. So in summary of that, the sort of recommendations come around to 3 core words: respect, rethink, renew. We need to improve via the various stakeholders and things that FIDIC does and its activities and other stakeholders' activities that we work with, the respect for water, actually to move it up the political agenda. So not only we get investment, but people use it more sensibly, people are aware of its true value. So this is going down the sort of route like carbon emissions did. We need to rethink the innovative approaches we're taking, and we need to continually evolve. And that's the panelists and speakers will talk about that today, I'm sure. And we need to really renew our efforts to do them, because the size of the challenge is still significant and it's getting bigger day by day. And with that, Nelson, I will hand back to yourself.
Thank you very much, Graham, for that quick introduction into the summary of the report. Can I just qualify this? That, I mean, when I hear the word 3R, what it says to me is that, respect, renew, and rethink. respect, that we do need water, renew in the sense that, we need to understand the challenges that goes with that and some of the things that we've actually put in place and solutions that we there. And then the question is, how do we combine all of that to deliver what the sustainability development goals in? Bill, in his opening comment, talked about engineers are well positioned to deliver the solution. And he actually used the word innovation as the key message to drive the agenda. And I think I share that passionately and strongly with Bill. So at this point in time, I'm going to move on into the real crux of the whole meeting. Now, I'm really blessed, if I can use the word blessed, and some people may find it a bit too biblical, but please, bear with me. I'm blessed with 5 good experts from different parts of the world. I've got Peter Macy, which is actually currently based in South Africa. I've got Babak from Iran, and I've got Stuart, who is actually genuinely was from Switzerland, but tells me he's in Kentucky at the moment. Then I've got Owen, who is from Ireland, and then our Natalie from Australia. Now, understanding that we are all operating in different time zones, and I said this jokingly earlier on, that every time we do this webinar, I wake Bill up. But actually, he gets up about that time every day. So that put me to shame. So we've got on one hand, people is very early in the morning, and then we've got on the other hand, Natalie coming very late in the evening. So I want to try and focus this into about 1 hour, 20 minutes conversation. And the way we're going to take it is very much interactive. In a minute, I'm going to invite each of the speaker to introduce themselves when I come into them. And the speaker will introduce themselves and also talk a little bit about their company. And if they have a word or two to say on the subject, they may just say that. I'm going to put questions across to each of the speakers, and I'll probably start with 2 questions to each speaker. And we go through that round from Peter all the way to Natalie. That hopefully should take us to about 45 minutes conversation. And then if we have time, I will go back to the individual with 1 more question. On the hour at 1 o'clock Central European time, we want to open the floor up for questions that will come from the audience. And I'm told that quite a number of people's got questions coming through. So please, wherever you are, be patient with us. In an hour's time, we will open the floor for questions to come through. We put those questions to the panelists and we do the best we can to try and address that. So to give it a kickstart, I'm going to ask Peter Macy, to do a very quick introduction of yourself and your company. And if you have a word or two on the subject, without going too much into detail, to do that. And then I will put a few questions to you. So Peter, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Nelson, and thank you, FIDIC, for inviting me to this call, and welcome to all those who are attending the call. So I'm the founder and president of Rockblue. It's a nonprofit whose mission is to help and support utilities in the developing world that are struggling to perform to serve their communities. We've been working since 2013. Got 75 team members, and we work in 5 countries with utilities that are serving over 5 million people. We'd like to grow and do more, but that's where we are right now. And prior to working with Rockblue, that's the nonprofit, I was in the private space working with consulting and engineering firms for about 40 years. I wanted to follow on what Graham was talking about with regards to the report, the State of the World report, and tackling global water, the global water crisis. So I know that today, 2 billion people lack safely managed water services. And to me, that's unconscionable. We can do better than that. But then I was just reading the joint monitoring project with WHO and UNICEF, which came out, the most recent one came out in, well, this month in July, where they indicated that, for example, where I'm working now in Africa, those who have access to water in the last 5 years, 2015 to 2020, has only increased from 33 to 35%. So it was low to begin with, and it's only increased by 2 percentage points in the last 5 years, despite all the effort we're putting into this. And so for me, it's just not enough. More has to be put in to achieve, as Bill mentioned, the SDG 6, Sustainable Development Goal 6, for everyone having access to water and sanitation by 2030. That same report indicated that we're only going to achieve 80%, about 81% of that goal by 2030 at the rate that we're going. So more has to be put in to this effort. And the last thing I want to say from that report is that 1.6 billion people are still without access to safely managed water services. So it substantiates all the other sources of information on this, that we're not where we need to be. We need to put more effort into that. So Nelson, that's it for my introduction.
Thank you very much, Peter. I mean, I think, that's a very good point to give us a kickstart. I mean, Peter, of course, you are in a vanguard of change, and you're really at the top end to see what is going on, particularly where your organization is positioned and what your guys achieve. Few questions I thought I might put across to you, and it'd be good to get your view, because I know that you've covered that view, particularly in the report. In your industry viewpoint, you put emphasis on the importance of water in developing world, and you talk about simple to complex system. How can we help system improve, and where appropriate accelerate up the various options you discussed to enable community to make water usage more accessible and sustainable? I mean, how do we do that? How do we achieve that if we are lacking behind in making progress? We've only done 5% increase in the last 5 years. What are the chances of actually moving up the food chain and achieving more and quicker?
Okay, that's a good question. So the first thing I want to say is access to water and sanitation from a technological point of view is quite easy. Getting people water and the capture of water, the treatment of water, the distribution of water, that is all very easy. The hardest area, and the area that needs the attention, is in good management and capacity building, effective governance, and then durable solutions. And I'll just add a little something on the durable solutions. We put an emphasis on the durable solutions because there's no time and there's no money to do things twice. And too often that's exactly what we're doing. We come in, we do something, it lasts for 5 years, maybe 10, and then we're back to square one. So that's why I added the durable solutions. So I think that if we can put the emphasis on good management capacity building and effective governance, and then finding durable solutions, not just solutions, but durable solutions, it's going to solve a myriad of other problems, such as non-revenue water, which is quite high, creditworthiness of water service providers, transparency. So what I'm saying is, with the limited resources we have, I would advocate for putting those resources towards those 3 areas. It doesn't mean that we're going to neglect everything else. But if we focus on those 3 areas, we're actually going to help some of the other areas that are needed to achieve SDG 6.
Thanks very much, Peter. It's interesting that you talk about governance, good management, and I think you use the word durable solution. I call it sustainable solution because the word sustainable is being used. And I think one of the issues that I probably pick up from where you are based at the moment, and I hate to use the word, but it's often coined, that when you have a solution, which is an engineering solution to a human issue, in most cases is built in different parts of the world, maybe not so much in the West, but it's built in different parts of the world because they haven't got the capacity, because they haven't got the management capability. Then it becomes a white elephant. Then in 5 years' time, it's down the drain. You have to start all over again. So I can see where you come up by saying durable solution. Now, the question I was going to put across to you is, what kind of example of community engagement have you seen that really work well, that ensure systems are truly a community system? Because this is what I sense, that durable solution is linked to the community. You need to provide a solution that actually works within the community and that is sustainable. So what example have you picked up over the years that is worth sharing, Peter?
So Nelson, I'll give you 2 examples. One in the rural space in post-war Mozambique, in northern Mozambique, where a project that I was involved in, we spent a lot of time working with the community and getting complete buy-in and acceptance of ownership, and working through what we call the tenets of durability that we describe with the acronym ROCKS. You can find that from our website. But that worked because a lot of time was spent with the community trying to understand where they're coming from, what they needed, and getting people to sort of buy in to the different aspects of managing the water systems that we're talking about. So it can be done, but you need that effort to really get the buy-in of the community, because too often we come into a community, we come in way too fast, and there's no complete buy-in. And so literally by the time we leave, a lot of that infrastructure starts to degrade and the systems start to degrade because of that. The other example, which is a really good one, everyone's aware of this, is Cape Town Day Zero. Now, I arrived in Cape Town right about the peak of Day Zero in Cape Town, when I was showering with one small bucket of water, and my neighbors were doing the same thing. And the reason I bring this up is really, in that case, the community of Cape Town, which represents 4 million people, they got together and they worked together to dramatically reduce demand, 50% reductions in demand. And a lot of those demands have sustained themselves over time. The drought is gone. We're now getting plenty of rain, too much rain, but a lot of that reduction in demand has been sustained even after that. But that is an example of the community coming together to deal with a crisis effectively so that they actually never reach that Day Zero.
Peter, it's interesting you raised that, because I was only going to put 2 questions, but you've led me on to the next question, which, if you don't mind, I'm going to put it across because it's actually worth building on. Do you find in your experience where you are providing a solution to a community that sometimes it sounds like an imposition rather than engaging to understand what their needs are, understand what is the natural resources available, and be able to come up with an engineering solution that is appropriate for them? Is it your experience that in most cases, we don't do enough consultation or enough early engagement to understand what is a durable solution that the community can take ownership of?
That's a really good question. So Nelson, I talked about these tenets of durability that we describe with the acronym ROCKS. The C letter in that word is connecting with what people already know, understand, accept, and they're comfortable with. And so that is absolutely critical. Whenever we do the work that we do, we try and understand what those that we're working with, what they understand, what they're comfortable with, and try as best we can to parallel their comfort level and to basically swim with the current instead of against the current. And we find that when you do that, the solutions are far more durable. The alternative, to come in and present something that's brand new that maybe we're comfortable with in our culture, in our society, from wherever we came from, can be done as long as we bring entirely our own culture, but that's not how it works. We're working with a different culture, and we need to accept that other culture and work with that culture for this to be effective.
Thank you very much, Peter. I'll come back to you later on that, Peter, because I think we could spend a whole day on that conversation. I'm now going to invite, Babak Banijamali, if I've got it right, from Iran, to do a very quick introduction to yourself and a few words about, your contribution, and then we go into the questions again. Babak?
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Thanks very much, Nelson. I'm very privileged and honored to be a part of this distinguished panel. And currently, I'm the vice chairman of Darya-Bandar Consulting Engineers, which is one of the longest established consulting engineering organizations in Iran. And we have been heavily involved in sustainability-related projects in the water sector, especially. And also, I have 2 other hats. One of them is I'm the chairman of the Iranian Coastal and Marine Structures Engineering Association, which is an NGO, the largest NGO of the country, that we are active in the tackling issues related to sustainability of the seas in the coastal regions. And as well as that, I'm the vice chairman of the Maritime Navigation Commission of PIANC, which is the World Association for Waterborne Transport, located in Belgium. And so it's, again, a bit similar to FIDIC, but maybe from a different angle. It's actually maybe more technical and involved in preparing design criteria. For example, we are trying to use issues like, or actually principles of circular economy when it concerns the design and also planning of new facilities. So this is what we are doing, and I'm very happy to be a part of today's discussions.
Thank you very much, Babak. I mean, one thing you didn't mention that you talk about all other role, but you didn't talk about your role within Sustainability Development Committee. So I'm going to challenge you on that. Now, let me come back to you. I gone through your paper.
Well, that's right.
I thought I should build that
Okay.
plug in because Bill did talk about, the diversity of the contributor to FIDIC activity. He talked about gender, talked about young and age, but also geography is important. So I'm really delighted that you're able to join us on this particular issue. Thank you. Now, the question I was going to put across is that you wrote in the paper, and I just said, how do we encourage the broader thinking about water use that you mentioned? The broader use of the water. Because people talk about water, is it just for one thing or the other? How do we talk about the broader use of the water in the wider sense? The floor is yours.
Thanks. Actually, it's a very important question, actually, and I think it's very, it's a good point to actually consider how do we actually have a more holistic approach and also a more integrated approach to solving water problems all the way from catchments, rivers, oceans, groundwater, and also the water management systems that are within the cities. I think the challenge is multifolded. One of the things to think about and bear in mind is that it has to be a governmental priority for all governments around the world. We as people of the earth, we actually share the love for the globe and also for the earth itself. And so we have to build on that. We have to have more inclusivity, and we have to have more diversification when it comes to cooperation between governments. A lot of the issues that we are facing in the realm of water-related issues around the globe are not related to a certain country or even a region. That really emphasizes the fact that we have to have an intergovernmental approach. And then we also have to have within a government, because the water sector is so broad, we need to have good cooperation between different ministries, that all of them are not, there's not necessarily one ministry or two that actually oversees management of water issues. That's actually an inter-country challenge for many countries. And as well as that, we have to consider that there has to be more reward and penalty schemes to actually more effectively cater to having more motivation for a broader approach. And I think that really this is like on an NGO level, on a government level, there's all this need. And I would have to say that this is an existential threat that we are facing, and the humanity has shown this propensity to come together and tackle this. And I think that we have to rise above anything which is keeping us, inducing any kind of separation, and we have to because that will has to be there, and there has to be also, of course, there has to be more financing. We have to establish the value of water, and then we have to do this in a humane way, of course. And then we have to tackle this problem all together. And this is like it's very much an interdisciplinary problem as well. So there are multifold of challenges that we are facing, and I think the report is going into that in further detail. And I just would like to finish this question by saying that, to paraphrase Gandhi, he said that we all have to be the change that we want to see in the world. And I think it starts at the person level. We engineers, we are responsible. We have to take the responsibility for education, awareness, and also for being more proactive, because we are being faced with different manifestation of this problem on a daily basis, which is very important that we try to be more proactive when it comes to making everyone aware and come to hopefully a more global, acceptable approach.
Thank you very much for that, Bob. That's very good. That leads me to the next question I was going to put across. You discussed how adaptation and resilience are a key focus for water system and solution, integrating changes in climate into their design, asset management, investment in this chain happening fast. The question is the investment in this area, is it happening fast enough? Are we making enough to achieve the sustainability development goal? Do you think we are making sufficient progress? I mean, the poll we drew earlier on seems to say no. What is your take?
Indeed, Nelson. Actually, we need to have a continuous supply of bankable projects if you want to, achieve that. And I think there was also this thing that in the past years, there was some underestimation of the pace of the climate change that actually also was a factor in why the actual response hasn't been meeting the demands to fulfill the goals. For example, we have talked about goal number 6, but I'd like to also mention goal number 14. I had a small part going back to your question at the start about my own contribution. I tried to include something on biodiversity of the oceans, and the threat that we are facing by warming of the North Ocean is actual. Some of the species of fish, for example, or marine life forms are going to be extinct over time. And that's not a long time from now, but because they don't have simply a way of adapting. So I think that regarding goal number 6 and goal number 14, both of them we are lagging behind, and there are some definitely, unfortunately, there are some unreversible changes during our lifetime, and also perhaps future generations that we have to be very wary of. And I think that we have to have a more urgent plan for action, and we need to have a financial support, and we need to that actually is well tied in with the policies that need to be also, like from top. They have to be basically have some more international cooperation. I know FIDIC has been, for example, very active in having international partnerships with international organizations like AATC, which are involved in the water-related fields. And that has to, I think, increase to have that nexus effect for all the stakeholders to be on board, to have more rapid and more adequate response to what we are seeing right now. And it is very urgent, and it's by no means something that's far away from anyone, I think, that's attending the webinar. We all know that this is something that has to be addressed. And we have to be it's very important also to have some issues that are better described in the report, like having adaptive planning, to have some foreseen resilience in the design and planning beforehand. So we need to approach this problem from various levels and by various means.
Thank you very much. I'm going to come back to you later, Babak. I'm going to go across now to Stuart Orr. Stuart Orr is from WWF International, and I just wonder, Stuart, perhaps if you are able to do a very quick introduction to yourself and to your company, and then I've got 2 questions I'm going to put across to you. I'm conscious of the time. Thank you, Stuart. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Nelson. Yes, thank you, everybody, and appreciate the opportunity. So my name is Stuart Orr. I'm the Freshwater Practice Lead at the World Wildlife Fund. We are the world's largest conservation organization, and freshwater is a very high priority thematic within my institution. I have about 450 staff working in 72 countries, working on everything from hydropower planning all the way through to irrigation, supply issues, to tracing and tagging river dolphins. So you can imagine the range of issues that we work with across our countries and with partners, society, communities, etc. There's a lot to say about water, Nelson, in 2 minutes. It's the most fascinating resource there is. So I'll keep it simple. I think that in these conversations that we have about water, whether it's financing the value of water, the state of water, the world's water crises, etc., reminding people that water doesn't come from a tap, that water actually comes from ecosystems, is extremely important. We cannot forget the role that rivers, wetlands, groundwater play in delivering the water systems to society, to economies, to industry, etc. And yet I feel they are the most neglected. And I need to bring that back into the conversation so that we can make sure that we protect the very thing that brings us life. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. That's a very good introduction. I mean, what I was going to approach you, I mean, obviously, with 450 staff in 72 countries and dealing with ocean in the wider sense, obviously, species and what happened in their population is very critical. The question that I have for you, with the challenges that we have, are we doing enough in terms of corrective action to make sure that at least we have an improvement in the water there? Are we doing enough in that space?
Short answer is no. So to give you some context, again, specifically in freshwater. So in WWF, we track the world's species populations over time. So since 1970, we have seen an 83% decline in freshwater species abundance. That's the highest decline. It's higher than oceans, it's higher than terrestrial. And of course, that decline is for a lot of various reasons: pollution, overfishing, poorly sited infrastructure, et cetera, et cetera. But to the point that Babak was making, biodiversity is extremely important, not just because of the aesthetic value, but is important for food security, is important for livelihoods, is important for recreation. Economies are vital in many parts of the world. So it's an extremely important issue for many people. But the state of the world's biodiversity, along with the climate crisis, I think that twin crises is something that we're seeing rise up the political agenda. And you're seeing and hearing a lot more about what we need to be doing to correct this. But I think the short answer is, Nelson, no, I don't think we are doing an adequate enough job to really consider the impacts that we're having on these ecosystems and what we need to do to change that.
Okay, thanks very much. I mean, like Peter, you mentioned the importance of communities and the need for a greater degree of integrated planning. How do
Yes.
we move such concepts up the agenda, especially when planning changes have a tendency to cause opposition and controversy? I mean, I know I lived in UK for 40 years, and
Mm,
it takes quite a long time for planning. And the
mm.
question then is, how do we ensure that the communities are involved in the process and yet doesn't delay the whole process of delivering that? What's your take?
Yeah, I think they go hand in hand. I think you usually see delays and controversies when you don't consult the community in the first place. So I think there's a lot of lessons learned over many years. You can talk to the mining sector, you can talk to the agriculture sector, you can talk to the engineering sector. They all have their stories to tell in this regard. Engaging the communities from our perspective is of course vital. I can't think of any work that we do that doesn't involve community perceptions. It's really about values, right? You have to understand the values that people have to these systems and what they derive from these in terms of aesthetic value, but also livelihoods, incomes, food security, et cetera. And until you really understand that, it's very, very hard to promote or to recommend any kind of solutions going forward. Top-down kind of interventions in a locally focused situation such as water just doesn't work. But to your point about planning, we do a lot of work around system scale planning, particularly around energy and hydropower. And I think this is a sector that is slowly shifting for a lot of reasons. I think they have had a lot of controversy in their history. But I think that there are definitely new ways and innovations in how we can think about planning at river system and river basin level to not just optimize the amount of energy that we come out of river systems, but to really think about where are the best places to site infrastructure and how can we leave rivers free flowing where we can leave them free flowing, and where do we need to use rivers as workhorses where we need to use them as workhorses. And I think in doing so, we can optimize not just the energy and the outputs that we receive from these systems, but we can also protect those systems that are vital to biodiversity, to food security, to downstream needs such as sediment and other values that we have really poorly undervalued over history.
It's interesting that you talked about that, Stuart. I mean, I was going to come back to you with the third question, but actually I'm going to put the third question to you because it's actually quite relevant. To me, you connect nature-based solution with investor and the need for financial return. Are there currently sufficient benefits to encourage large-scale investment in that area? Or do you think because it's so difficult to put monetary value to what I call the sort of the benefit side of it, then it becomes a very difficult case to put forward. What is your take on that?
2 or 3 years ago, I would have agreed with you, Nelson. I mean, I think on the mitigation side, the bankability of mitigation nature-based solutions is much clearer because you can link that into, say, carbon markets, et cetera. Yeah. But on the adaptation side, which is really the space we're talking about with fresh water, so droughts and floods, for example, you're right. The bankability of, say, restoration of floodplains or restoration of wetlands that will absorb the capacity of water is not that attractive. But we just have to look at the news. You just have to look at China. You just have to look at Europe. You have to look at situations where at some point very soon, insurance companies, political leaders, other people are going to say, you know what? It's a really good investment that we restore these wetlands, that we give the river some room to breathe, that we restore the forest and the headwaters of because the economic costs downstream are becoming so extreme and are becoming so more frequent that I think the business case is becoming more clear every single day.
So I'm going to come back to you later on because this particular one is very topical on my agenda. And I really want to push that forward a little bit more, but I'm going to come back there. At this point, I'm going to call Owen Cullen from Ireland, from Nicola Odoa. Owen, would you actually introduce yourself as also, don't forget, you are one of the FIDIC Future Leaders member. So please, Owen, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Nelson. And thank you very much to FIDIC for inviting me today. Yeah, I'm a senior engineer with Nicholas O'Dwyer here in Dublin. Nicholas O'Dwyer Consulting Engineers, who work on all aspects of infrastructure, but with a particular focus on water and wastewater, working here in Ireland and for the water companies in the UK, but also more internationally on a number of World Bank and EU funded projects in Africa, across Europe and in the Middle East. In addition to my role with Nicholas O'Dwyer, last year I joined the FIDIC Future Leaders Council, building on some inputs I had with the ACI, the member association here in Ireland a number of years ago. And earlier this year, I was subsequently invited to join the Contracts Committee as the link between the Contracts Committee and the Future Leaders Council. I'm delighted to represent both Nicholas O'Dwyer and the future leaders here today. Thanks, Nelson.
Okay, thanks very much, Owen. Well, I do know the name Nicola O'Dwyer goes back to my early days of being an engineer, and I do remember our company partnering with them. I know most of the partners within Nicola O'Dwyer, and I do know you have involvement with ACI. So, Sarah, we're very pleased to see the progression you've made. So, thank you very much for being involved. Now, the question I was going to put across to you, and it's very simple. As one of the FIDIC future leaders, do you discuss the importance of the water issue in young engineers within the Future Leaders Program? Is this something that you discuss, or is it something that doesn't really appear on your radar? And if you do discuss, what do you talk about? Does this concern you? Do you think we are doing enough? A very loaded question, Owen.
Thanks, Nelson. Yeah, I think one of the things I've really liked about joining the Future Leaders Council is the diversity within the group. It ranges across the globe with members from all over. And I think one of the things with water is that it actually impacts everybody across the world in some way, whether that's droughts currently in the US, it's flooding in Europe, flooding in China, droughts in some parts of Africa. It really is a global problem. And that's something that we do see in the Future Leaders Council, that it is represented particularly for that reason, because it gets discussed because it impacts us all in some way. And I think that young engineers in particular maybe are more keenly aware of environmental problems. That might be a little disappointing for some of the other members here, but I think it is true that younger engineers are more keenly in tune with environmental problems, with climate change, with biodiversity issues. And water is an area which has a real link between environmental problems, our food production, human health, and infrastructure issues. And it's an area that's being put under huge pressure by climate change. So I think in a lot of the discussions that we have about infrastructure and about problems facing our industry, water is really at the heart of those and is discussed as part of that. And I think that's one of the reasons that that young engineers in particular have a real crucial role to play in trying to address these problems. Because their issues for the future that we can see are getting worse, and that really need investment now and need to be tackled now. And so I think that's really where the young engineer group is able to bring a little bit of new energy to the topic.
And thank you very much on that. I know that when Bill did his introduction, and Bill probably know I'm always very fond of quoting him. He said he loves the diversity, he loves the age generation and all of that goes with that. And he's really delighted that it's not just the gender or geography, but actually also on the age. And he said he loved that. And I think that's quite good. But the question I was going to put across to you, Owen, is I'm glad that you've gone through the process through ACI, where you've acted at national level. You've now come across to FIDIC at the federal or what I call global level. Not only do you sit within the council, but you're also within the contract committee, so you make the connectivity. And I know Peter was saying something earlier on in our pre-conversation that FIDIC is well positioned to influence and where we need to bring this money together. So the question I was going to put across to you, can we encourage more people, or particularly the young talented people, to come into our sector? Because it really concerns me when you have good engineers come out of university and we lose them to the city and they go across. You've just talked eloquently that, you know, the food that we eat and the air that we breathe and everything is connected to the ecosystem, and the water is at the heart of it. Whether it's in the clean water or dirty water, or we recycle it, it's very important. How do we encourage more younger people to take interest in this particular sector? And are we doing enough? And if we're not doing enough, what else can we be doing?
Yeah, I think we can always be doing more, Nelson, but I think that the water sector is actually a really key sector in bringing young people and students into the engineering field. It's a great avenue for introducing people to engineering, because there's a very clear benefit between the work we do in the water sector and environmental benefits, health benefits, and it's a very direct link between the two. And I think really, students are naturally drawn to critical issues that are in the news, that are topical. And I think one of our roles as in FIDIC and as engineers is to keep water as one of those critical topics that's there. It's obviously getting an awful lot of coverage at the moment with the flooding in Europe and in China, as you said. It's getting, I think, a lot of coverage in the US with drought over around the Hoover Dam area. But we need to keep that in the news cycle. We need to keep it, the importance of water and of infrastructure development as much as possible. I think that one of our senior engineers made a comment recently on one of our kind of company all hands calls, where he had been involved in a major project for Irish Water here in Ireland, down in Cork, where there was significant number of direct outfalls to the Cork Harbour, to the estuary. And for many, many years, we've been working on that project, and he's put in a huge amount of work into it. But he was down there in the last couple of weeks after the schools had gone on holidays, and there were some summer camps out using the bay. There was sailing going on, and there were summer camps with school children using the estuary there. And I think that's the real link that we need to get across to people, that getting involved in the sort of infrastructure projects that we do, and in tackling these problems with the water sector, has real tangible benefits to society. And you have an estuary there that's then available for school kids to go out and sail in, and that, I think, that really will bring people into our business.
Thanks very much, Owen. That's really good for, I think, I can go on and press you, because I like the young ones. Since Bill told me we are the old ones, I like to talk to the young one more often. I'm sure you're going to get more from me. I'm now going to introduce Natalie Muir. Natalie, who is also member of the FIDIC Sustainability Development Committee. Natalie is not new to this particular webinar. She's been on several of them. So, but for the benefit of those who are new, who are part of our participants. So Natalie, would you be kind enough to introduce yourself? Then I've got a couple of questions before we get to the hour session and open the floor for questioning. Natalie, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Nelson. Good evening, good morning to everyone, and thanks again to FIDIC for the opportunity to speak at one of these webinars. My name's Natalie Muir. I'm the General Manager for Water and Environment at Cardno, and also, as Nelson said, I'm one of the Vice Chairs of the Sustainable Development Committee. So I guess just Cardno is an environmental and engineering and also international development company. We've got about 400 staff globally. Under my remit in water and environment, I cover all the aspects of water infrastructure, so sort of urban infrastructure for water utilities, water resources, and also the environmental part of the business. So that's really that full gamut of the water cycle. And as we've sort of been talking about, catchments, rivers, treatment, water discharges, and also the supporting environment side of things. I guess probably building a bit on what Owen's talked about water being the heart of things. I'm a water person, but for me, I think I'm really passionate about water and sustainability, because I really see water as being very foundational to achieving the SDGs. We call out SDG 6 and SDG 14 in the report, but water is the heart of livelihood, productivity, food crops. It's important to energy. So, zero hunger, goal 2, goal 4, quality education, because if there's not adequate water and sanitation, then education outcomes are compromised. Similarly, gender equity, goal 5, if there isn't adequate sanitation, then particularly young females don't attend school and therefore have less chance in their later lives. So, I really see that it's not just about water. Water is so foundational to achieving the SDGs, and I guess really passionate about making sure we can tackle this crisis so that we can also build a better world, which is what the SDGs are all about.
Natalie, thank you very much for that introduction. I think you actually, the point you said, that's what the SDG is all about. It's bigger than just, one item. Um, I mean, I started my introduction by saying Belgium, Germany, China. What is common? And then if you go across to the eastern part of America, you have fire. If it's not Australia, it's fire. Obviously, there is something called global warming, and this is going to impact us. And I hear earlier on when Stuart talked about when you think about the cost of putting things right down the line from insurance, then the alarm bells start ringing. And the question was, with the flood and the drought, which demonstrated the extent to which climate change is actually real, the question is the impact on the society? Are various stakeholders treating this threat seriously? Do you think they are taking it seriously? I mean, we have one president in America who said there's nothing called global warming, but thank God it's no longer there. We now have somebody who said, I'm going to champion the whole idea. So at the political issue, we had G7 recently meeting, and they're looking about, this net zero. Do you think this is now being serious, or is it a political talking show?
Yeah, sure, Nelson. It's a good question, and you talk about droughts and floods and bush and fires and so forth. Obviously, in Australia, we see all of that as well. Is it being taken seriously? It's starting to be taken more seriously, but I'm not sure it's been taken seriously enough. And, COVID's a really interesting contrast. It's taught us an awful lot about disruption. We're probably getting better at dealing with disruption and what that means from a COVID perspective. But, if we put the same amount of effort into solving the climate crisis as we have into a global pandemic, we'd be a whole lot closer to where we are in achieving the SDGs. I always love Graham's countdown at these state of the world reports about the time left to see the SDGs, and I think there was a report, I've probably spoken about this at a previous one, but a 2019 report that said we still had 43 years worth of effort required to achieve the SDGs, and we've got 9 years to go. So we're certainly not we're not taking it as seriously as I think we should, and as urgently as we really need to. I think also, though, we're also still grappling in a lot of ways about how we actually manage it. We talk a bit about adaptive planning and scenario planning and looking at the different ways that we can actually cater for climate change, but there's still not a lot of clarity about how to actually do that. So that uncertainty probably just feeds into not as much action about it as we really would like to see.
I mean, there are a number of project examples provided in this report, Natalie, and they cover different parts of the world. This is one of the things that Bill was absolutely keen about, that we should not just talk about one project in one geography, but we should cover varieties of projects in different parts of geography to show exemplar. And one of the things that Graham was talking about is saying, look, if we're going to be innovative and creative in future, then we need to be aware of the solution that we are providing now, so we know what works and what doesn't work. I'm just going to come back to you. There are many project examples provided in the report. How do we improve on the communication of lessons learned from that? Because quite clearly, all the time, engineering is always providing solution. But the solution that is right today may not be the solution that is required tomorrow because of the urgency of the climate change. So do you think we're learning enough? And are we communicating that effectively within the community and the politician who needs to know?
Yeah, sure. Look, I mean, I think a lot of the lessons learned are being shared fairly well on a local scale. I'm also part of the Australian Water Association, and every conference, every event that we talk about sustainability, SDGs, circular economy, resilience, that's all the key topics and the popular topics at those conferences and events and so forth. I think the global forum is a whole lot more challenging, but obviously it's probably more important that we're sharing lessons learned across the globe. And I think there's clearly a role for FIDIC in terms of facilitating those discussions, and we can link in with our member associations and their obviously associated companies in order to do that. Similar to Owen, I've really benefited from the discussions through the Sustainable Development committee about water and sustainability, and learn a lot about what's happening in other parts of the globe. So to be able to really share that and link into that, I think is really important. I think the other thing is it's really important to communicate or to understand how we communicate some of those things. So we really appreciate the particular elements of the projects that'll make a difference. And if I pull on an example, which is in the report, which is Cedar Grove Environmental Centre, which is one that's pretty close to my heart, and that's a project that's there's a bit of concrete and steel there. There's a fancy wastewater treatment plant that we could get all excited about the technology and all sorts of stuff. But the real power in that is it's the natural side. It's the wetlands. It's the riparian restoration that we've used to offset the nutrients. There's a great social story there about involving community groups, looking at utilising disadvantaged groups to help us with some of the planning of the wetlands and so forth. So, you know, it's about really trying to understand what are those things that can really make a difference. And importantly, you know, talking about sustainable solutions and not just sustainable infrastructure, which is all about, you know, getting in nice and early in that value chain.
Now, it's interesting you talk about that, actually, because I was going to say, you know, with all the nature-based solutions are being increasingly talked about, but we are starting to see them communicated. I mean, do you feel that, you know, we are getting involved in the early stage? Because one of the points that was raised earlier, I think it was Stuart, was about the early phase with the community. And I think this was also raised by Peter, that, you know, I mean, bringing a solution that is alien to the user is not the right one. And do you think we're doing enough in the early stage intervention and engaging community with all these good examples? Are we doing enough in that area at all?
I don't think you can ever do too much of that. Stakeholder engagement is fundamentally important to making sure you've got the right solution, and particularly when you're looking at, you know, different solutions, nature-based solutions, or something that might be very different to a normal solution. Engaging with that community and making sure that they understand what that means, that they have a say potentially in what that looks like. The Sustainable Development Committee are actually talking to WWF about some collaboration as well, which is really, really interesting to see. And, you know, there's the potential for us to see how that early influence in projects can potentially influence some really important projects in the Amazon. So one of the, you know, most diverse places on the planet. So look, I think there's some discussion at the early stages, and things like nature-based solutions are starting to be considered. But, you know, as Stuart said earlier, there's a long way for us to go.
Right. Okay. Now we've just gone to the point where we are on the hour, and I think Bill wants to chuck in, and Bill will be invited.
Yes, I think this happens every time, Natalie, you're speaking. I sort of piggyback on what you say, but
it must be Natalie that's give you that kickstart, Bill.
I think it's our background and what we do, but as a more general comment, you're spot on, Natalie, about our ability to share exciting technical elements of what we do, and we share them very well among the engineering community and the scientific community. And I think we're getting better at expanding those messages beyond just our technical profession. The fact that we've got Stuart here is just absolutely terrific to get organizations such as WWF more involved with us. We're trying to make progress with the COP initiative, you know, COP, and I think we've got a ways to go there, but we continue to try. And I know that with the United Nations, we've got good dialogue going as well. And I think we need to just constantly be looking at opportunities to share with the other stakeholders what engineers can do, because we've got a great message. One of the other things that I've heard in these presentations that, frankly, I haven't thought a lot about, but every once in a while, the thought enters my mind is insurance companies have to be very concerned about what's going on in the world. And I just wonder if there are ways for FIDIC to get more involved with insurance companies to generally get that message out that we can help mitigate some of the risk that they are very well aware of. So just some thoughts in that general area. It's something that we need to focus on and improve quite a bit. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks very much for Bill. I mean, Natalie, you've just really opened me up into a number of questions going through my mind. Can I invite the audience, please, if there's any question from the floor, please put it into the chat room. I'll try and pick them up. And Andy, in his usual manner, will try and package that to me in a more digestible manner. But I've got a few questions I just want to put across while we're picking up questions from the floor. I mean, we talked about, you know, the impact of flood and all the issue downstream. And Bill's just talked about issue about the insurance market, because, you know, whether in the design, we pay professional indemnity insurance, whether it's construction, we construct all risk issue, somehow somebody's underwriting this issue. And somehow I get the impression that the word resilient keep coming to mind, you know, and if nobody's talking about it, insurance should be talking about resilient infrastructure. And when we talk about infrastructure these days, it's not just about the road only or the airport, but actually the water system and the irrigation system and everything needs to come into that. And this is an open question. This is not a pre-prepared. This was triggered by the comment that Natalie and Bill just talked about. And I just wonder, do you feel that we are, you know, engaging enough to let the insurance and the underwriters to understand the challenges and how engineering can provide a solution rather than in the case of having to deal with the disaster? Let me bring Stuart into it because I know Stuart talked about, you know, we tend to don't value that much. In a few years back, you used to agree with me, but not anymore. So I just wonder, Stuart, just picking up your conversation, can we do more with the insurance and the risk? Let's use the word the risk market and the risk industry. Are we doing enough? And if we're not, what can we do to get them engaged that we can provide a solution that is sustainable and durable?
Yeah, thanks, Nelson. I think the narrative of risk has been very apparent in the water sector for a number of years. I mean, when you talk to the private sector, if you talk to the large food and beverage companies or the mining companies, they have been using risk tools, risk analysis for quite some time around water. But of course, you quickly have to have that conversation about opportunity. It can't just be about risk. It has to be, okay, so what do you expect me to do about it? So as the conversation has moved into the finance sector, which was also framed around risk, they were the guys saying, I understand it's a risk. What do you want me to do about it? And so I think that the journey that we've been on with the finance sector over the last 5 to 10 years has been fascinating around water. And I think the awareness is raising increasingly in the finance sector. I still think it's difficult for them because of the complexities of finance to know exactly where to mitigate those challenges, but we're getting there. And I think, you know, to the point that Babak was talking about bankable solutions, or Peter in the very beginning was talking about the questions about water supply, you're seeing different kinds of finance coming into these sectors that are coming up with innovative solutions or opportunities. And you're seeing different kind of finance, which is looking for different returns on investment. So I'm very encouraged by what I see on the risk and finance side. But to the insurance side, Nelson, I have to agree that while I've had many conversations with insurance companies and reinsurance companies, I still am struggling to understand quite where they're coming from on this and quite how we hook them into this agenda to the scale that I think we could and should and need to. So I think it is, as Bill said, I think this is a sector that would be great for you guys to engage. And I think we still have to unlock the opportunity. Getting back to my original point, I contend that if you are looking at the question of stranded assets in water, you look at assets from a perspective of drying and drowning. So you have drying and drowning assets in river basins across the world. And I would think that the insurance sector and the finance sector would have great incentives to think about ways in which they could invest in low cost or lower investment nature-based solutions or gray infrastructure upstream that would protect huge financial assets downstream. It seems like a no-brainer to me, but I'm not a finance guy, I'm a conservationist, so I'll leave it to others to help me figure that out.
So thank you very much for that. There's a question coming from the floor, but I'll let you get your moment for a minute and I'll come back to you again. Can I bring Peter back on? Because before we came live on this, I couldn't, stop overhearing Peter and Bill having their chit-chat conversation about what FIDIC can do. Peter, you know we are very close to a lot of the multilateral development banks. We are they've signed up to the FIDIC contract, and what they know is the best in class globally on adaptable quality contract that actually ensure that you deliver it to standard, and issue about liability or integrity is not being questionable. And if there is a dispute, there is process in the place that enable that to happen if you adopt FIDIC contract. So Peter, let me put you on the hotspot on the same subject. What do you think that we can do to actually get the ears and the audience of these people who wants to bring the money together but don't know how because of the fear of unknown of risk? Peter, can I put you on the spot? Then I'll start picking up questions from the floor. Peter?
Sure, Nelson. So what we see we work at Rockblue, we're working with a lot of utilities directly, and we work with utilities indirectly. They all need money. They need money for operating expenses. They need money for capital expenses. And then you have the financial institutions that have the money that they want to give as loans or as grants or something blended. as I think Stuart mentioned earlier. But there's a disconnect. There's a disconnect in that those financial institutions, they do have the money, but they are still quite reluctant to give that money to the water service providers, to the utilities, to the municipalities. And what we need to do is to figure out, what is the disconnect? What are the roadblocks? What are the obstacles? And to get over that. And I think with some of the documentation that FIDIC has with their contracts, they can provide a role in that. I'm not exactly sure what it is right now. We at Rockblue, we have our own ways of solving that riddle of the disconnect between those that have the money and those that need the money. But I do think, particularly through the contract mechanisms that FIDIC has developed, and maybe new ones, that FIDIC can play a major role in mitigating those obstacles between the money and those who need the money. But I just want to reiterate, because we interact a great deal with these development financial institutions, largely because we're working with water service providers. We know they have the money, we know they want to spend the money, but they are for good reason, they're very cautious. So we've just got to work together on breaking down some of the reasons for that caution.
Peter, it seems to me that there's one of the takeaway, which Bill hasn't said it, but I know he's going to say it. One of the takeaway for me is for you and I to get together after this particular webinar to see how we can actually bridge the gap. So I'm going to go to the floor and try and pick up questions. There's a question specifically for Stuart. I'll come back into that. There's a question which is really targeted towards FIDIC. Now, I don't know what UNDRR means, but somebody called Virgin Nadeka said, would FIDIC consider engaging more activity with UNDRR?
United Nations Office for Disaster Relief Recovery.
Natalie, I'm joking about that, Mr. Walker. I know you will butt in. Natalie, would you rescue me? Do you have a view as to what FIDIC could be doing with this organization so that we can be more visible?
Good question. Look, not knowing an awful lot about the organisation itself, but I would certainly say that, you know, it's one of the things that we have talked about under the Sustainable Development Committee is, you know, what are some of those partnerships that we want to try and pursue? Certainly engaging very broadly, I think, is really important for us so that we can understand global perspectives. We're a global organisation and we're trying to achieve and push the agenda forward, I guess, on a global scale. So certainly, I guess, be interested in hearing a little bit more about that particular organisation and how we might be able to link in with them. Obviously, there are some particular partnerships like the WWF one that we are keen to pursue in a bit more detail. We can't do that with everyone, obviously, but certainly, you know, keen to hear some perspectives and if there's some things to contribute into the work that we're doing through the SDC, be really interested to hear about it.
Natalie, I deliberately brought you into because I know that the initiative with WWF is going very well, and I think I'm glad that you showcased that. And I know through this report, we have relationship with UNEP, you know, which Graham's already posted, that's going through. I think the issue for us is how can, because again, I hear this word again and again, that when it comes to global, FIDIC is well positioned to be the voice, which we should be. The question for us, we have to be selective. And the question is, how best can we join the dots? So thank you very much for addressing that question. There is a question across here, which is really for Stuart. I think I'm going to put it across to Stuart. And he said, this is for Stuart. He said, since agriculture uses about 80% of fresh water that we use, how is the world doing in more wisely using water for the food we need? Stuart, are you in a position to answer that?
Absolutely, yeah. I have an irrigation background, so this one's a good one. So
Trust me, I did not plan it there. I did not plan it. It was just directed to you.
So you often hear the statistic that 70% of water is used in agriculture, and that is a global average, and that is correct. So what that means is that the water that we take from rivers and groundwater to put into irrigation is around 70% of all use. It's worth remembering that the vast majority of food is produced by rain-fed agriculture still. So rain-fed and irrigated systems are crucial to food security, as are the oceans and rivers, as we know from biodiversity. But to get to specifically on irrigation, yes, a vast majority of water is used from our river systems into irrigation. And of course, that irrigation is crucial to meet the demands of food supply across the world. There are clearly questions around food waste. There are questions around efficiency of water use. of conveyance of water use, of water leakage, et cetera, et cetera. Irrigation is a very complex space. And of course, getting to your point, Nelson, about talking about communities and people, is very much led by farmers. So it's a very, very difficult, complex space. There's a tremendous amount of technology available on irrigation efficiency that is increasingly being employed around the world. But it is not a one-size-fit-all kind of approach either. What works in one part of the world does not work in another, and I think that nuance is sometimes missed by donors and others in their desire to address this issue. I think the bigger question for me around irrigation, and certainly in my experience over many years, is that you can't separate irrigated systems from the river basins in which they come from. They are nested within these river basin systems. And I think that's the key message that's coming out of a lot of what we learn about water, is that you can't isolate one part of the water crisis of the water sector and think that you're not connected to the other. We have to think about the basin scale. We have to think about the connectivity of these things. And so I think that sometimes we focus a little bit too much on agriculture, sometimes rightly so, sometimes not. But I think that if we get our allocations right and we understand how much is in the system, then what we grow should be determined by the market or determined by farmers in those river basins. But separating it from those river basins, I think, is where it starts to become quite dangerous. Thanks.
Okay, thanks very much, Stuart. I mean, there's a question here from, if I've got it right, is it Lieutenant Colonel Sherry?
Nelson?
Yes, Bill?
Could I just want to jump in on what Stuart said. A couple of things that I recall. That 2015 report, we talked about the need for more intergovernmental agreements related to river basins and groundwater. And I wouldn't say that slipped through the cracks in these last two documents, but we probably haven't talked a lot about it. So that's something else we ought to have on the radar screen. The other one that I haven't heard much about that intrigued me in the 2015 report was talking about virtual water and concepts of where to grow things and how to grow them. And I think, as Stuart said, there's a lot of work being done on efficiency of use of soils with minimal water, but I hadn't seen a lot on those areas of what to grow and where to grow it. Another thing that's easy to say and difficult to do, but it would be nice to see some work perhaps going on into the intergovernmental agreements in that area. So I'm sorry, Nelson, I just wanted to mention those couple of things.
No, Bill, thank you. It's good to get it out while it's still fresh and still, right in your mind. Don't let it go. The question I was going to put across, I think is actually from somebody who's called Lieutenant Colonel Sherry Hash. He's retired, which means he got plenty of time on his hand. He said, are there any plans for integrating water conservation-based agricultural practices as part of the SDG plan? Should I bring Bobby or Natalie? Who is one? Natalie, do you want to jump onto that?
Sure. I mean, I guess the Sustainable Development Goals kind of, cover everything. And if we're talking about water for all, then that means we've got to make the best use of what we've got. And, as we were just talking about, agricultural practices take up an awful lot of that water. So water conservation is part of it. And some of that, I think, also relates to, food choices and the like. A high meat-based diet means that we actually, the water footprint of that is actually quite significant. So what are we actually doing from an agriculture and a cropping point of view to change that water footprint and to change that water usage? So look, I think it's absolutely embedded within SDG 6, because in order for us to have water for all, we've got to conserve exactly what it is that we have, albeit there's spatial variability and you've got to have it in the right places at the right times. But I think that conservation area is really important in that agricultural sector.
Thanks very much, Natalie. I've got a question which I think I'm going to put across to Babak. And the question really is, how practical can the industry be more vocal on this crucial issue and get opinion from to listen more and importantly act? Bobby, what's your view?
Thanks very much for the question. I think it's very, very crucial to getting good results. And just also returning to the previous question, I think the cost of inaction anyhow far outweighs the cost of any action we would have to mitigate what's going to be occurring in the coming years. I think just it starts on the individual level. We all have to be ambassadors for this cause. We all have to also try to live by it. I've personally seen, I have a friend of mine who's a university professor, and instead of just focusing on writing papers and trying to work on academic stuff, he's very much trying to live sustainably. And I think trying to start at the individual level and then trying to get NGOs on board and trying to also within the projects, I think what we have discussed also in the Sustainable Development Committee is to have perhaps suggestions for FIDIC terms of contract to have some, more severe or more stronger reward and penalty clauses or indications, or even just in projects to have that in mind, include, for example, some kind of a climate change awareness as a part of social responsibility when we are involved in projects. I think you have to think of it as a sort of a daily thing. I mean, and definitely you have to take a proactive stance on that.
Yeah, thank you very much. This question, which also is about how do we get the best out of it? I mean, the report talks about rethink. The question is, how do we get stakeholders to rethink these challenges and think, act, and do differently and be innovative at time of post-COVID? I mean, obviously, I hear the word build better. I hear the word, rebuild. I hear the word government invest in new infrastructure. So the question is, how do we rethink and how do we look at the challenges and how do we think and act and make sure decision makers think differently now as part of the post-COVID issue? Any thoughts on that? Who wants to go on that? Stuart or Eoin or who is he? Even Bill, I'm not sure. Whoever wants to, I'm open up to suggestions. Stuart.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I live and breathe in the water sector, and so like others on this panel, I mean, I'm very, very well aware of the different sectors, and we pay attention to these debates very closely, and of course, we share our frustrations and we share our learnings, etc. So I think we hear all of these things that we've discussed today in great detail. I think what you can bring to the table is that you are an extremely powerful organization with a great reach, with an extremely important role to play in delivering the SDGs. And I think that the more that you're exploring these ideas and really thinking of ways to incorporate them into your own decision making. And I think somebody made the point about how you could also be that broker between the multilaterals, the finance, the insurance. I think that this is an extremely important role to play. I also think there's a lot of real innovation coming out of the water sector around finance and other things that I think in that space, we should have a real conversation about how can an organization like yours really help facilitate some of the opportunities around bankability for some of the things we've discussed today. So I think that, I think to answer your question, Nelson, I think it's really about how you can learn from what's already being done out there as opposed to reinventing the wheel, but also bringing it in innovative ways to think about how we could therefore amplify them or leverage what you can bring to the table so that we can get some action. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. As Natalie said, we can use the massive global effort that we have seen to tackle the pandemic as a paradigm shift. We need to do an effort we need to make to address sustainable issue. It shows that what is possible. To me, I mean, this is a very good, interesting comment. And I just want to build on that, Natalie. We can do a lot. Bill tells me again and again, engineers are there. In fact, people say engineers are more important than doctors. Because if you don't build the environment that is sustainable, if there is no good water, if there's no good sanitation, if we don't have the right infrastructure, doctors won't exist. They can't care of people. So we actually play a key role. And I just wonder, how do we take this to the next point? I mean, of course, I hear a lot of positives in saying FIDIC can be the vanguard of change, FIDIC can be the broker. I'll put it back to you from Sustainability Development Committee. Are we underplaying our hand? Or is it a case that we are yet to start?
No pressure, hey, Nelson. We'll just solve the water crisis. But look, my favorite quote at the moment is no water, no life, no green, no blue. It's
no water, no life.
Yeah, it absolutely, summarizes everything. And I guess as we've talked at the SDG through our potential involvement in COP, it also talks to this point around, policymakers can make all sorts of decisions around net zero targets and all sorts of things. But at the end of the day, it's the engineering community that'll be the ones that will be delivering it. But similar to the insurance discussion, I think we were talking about before, I think it's about making sure that the voice of the engineering industry is heard really loud. As an industry, there's lots that we can do. We're very innovative. So as long as we're thinking about the sustainable solutions nice and early in the value chain, then we've got that real opportunity to influence that. That's relatively within our control. The piece is making sure that the engineering community is at the table when the investment decisions are being made and when some of these things are going forward. The danger with COVID a little bit is that as all of the economies around the world want to try and stimulate their economies and push forward all of these infrastructure projects, there's always talk about stuff that's shovel ready. So it's about pushing projects forward and pushing them forward quickly. That's great, but does that actually give us the right opportunity to think about whether they're the right solutions? And yet, do we just make infrastructure a bit more sustainable, or do we actually look at making sure the solution itself is really sustainable? So I think it's about that consultation piece very broadly. FIDIC has a really strong voice, and I think the louder we shout and the more that we talk and the more engaged we are very broadly across the industry and across industries, I think is the way that we can help really drive it forward.
Natalie, you've just kickstarted what I was going to actually lead on to. We are coming towards the end of our time. I want to make sure that we finish on time and still give Bill 1 minute to say 1 or 2 words. But I just want to go back to each and every one of the speakers just to give you one last opportunity to say a closing word. COP26 is coming, and where, in the context of what we are talking about, where do you think, we just one advice sentence for FIDIC? And I'm going to start off, by going back to Peter Macy and work from Peter. Peter, what is your one advice for FIDIC? COP26 coming through, big issue coming through. Water is part of the SDG, and it's not just net zero, only it's the whole holistic approach. So Peter, what's your closing statement?
My one advice is you have a lot of power and a lot of influence with your contract mechanisms. You can actually update those contract mechanisms to include that which you really want, that which you really care about. So for example, if you want more durability in future projects, and a lot of people are using your contracts, then maybe suggest clauses in your contracts that require the bidder to have durability plans in whatever they're implementing, and to really prove that they can put together a durable solution. That's it.
Thank you very much. Babak, your closing statement.
Thanks, Nelson. I think the mnemonic renew, respect, renew, rethink is really sums it up. And I would just add redouble to it. And I would say we just have to redouble our efforts everywhere. Try to make sure that we close the gap, as Graham was saying, that we definitely faced with the sort of the prospect of not being on time, and it's very important that everyone, I guess, redoubles. And I would say that is the most important part, and I invite everyone to read the report.
Thank you very much. Stuart, the floor is yours.
I think going into COP, I think the main message is that the way in which people and economies are going to feel climate change is through the water environment. And I think taking that message forward with your members is going to be very important. Thank you.
Thank you. Owen?
Thanks, Nelson. I think Stuart mentioned that the kind of frustrations and the challenges. But I think one of the things I liked about this report is that we also outlined the solutions, and we gave some examples of projects that had dealt with these. But I think going back to your earlier question about drawing people into engineering, when we have these major issues, we want to be the ones at the front showing that we have solutions, and that engineering and infrastructure development is a way of dealing with some of these issues and getting that message across, as Natalie was just pointing out.
Thank you. Natalie, your take-off now, your takeaway. What's your closing statement?
Look, I think it's really that, as the voice of the engineering industry to a large extent, it's about making sure that we're heard. Engineers can do amazing things. We can solve this water crisis. We just need the time, the opportunity, and the ability to do it.
So we need the time, the opportunity, and ability to be at the table to do it. Bill, 1 minute, and then we wrap up. Bill, the floor is yours. Do we still have Bill with us?
I forgot I was on mute. I'm sorry. But once again, we have had a fantastic webinar. Some really talented people. I get so charged up just listening to you, and I get so confident about the future in dealing with any crisis that that we're going to face. I mean, a few of the things that I would emphasize based on what we're hearing is, and I know Peter Macy and I have chatted about this over many years. We worked for the same firm for a while. This durable solution problem is very real, and we've really got to focus on it, because when a project is constructed and operating and then it fails, I submit that you don't go back to square one, you go back to square -1, because you've got a lot of people very frustrated and very angry and looking, frankly, out of human nature, someone to blame. And the engineering community very often takes it. So I like that concept of thinking about at the contracts committee of what we might put in suggestions to deal with durable solutions. And we need to continuously talk to the funding agencies about that too, to make sure that when they're loaning money out, that there is funding available to keep the thing running. I love that term of no water, no life, no green, no blue. Wow, engineers can come up with some really clever stuff, and maybe we can build on that kind of message, because it's a great bang. There it is. And the final comment, which I also made before, is all of us as engineers need to look for opportunities to communicate beyond ourselves and our profession. I think a lot of us are very good at it, and we just need to find the opportunities to do just that. And I think I went over my 1 minute, Nelson, but as you said, I'm passionate about this subject. So.
Bill, thank you very much for that. I understand that we now have 387 days to meet the water SDG. Do you think we can achieve this goal based on the current practice or based on what we've just been discussing? Time to vote. Now, while Barbara is showing that, I'm just going to use that to wrap up. It's been a real pleasure to have all the 5 speakers, joining us. And I want to use this opportunity to thank each and every one of you for your contribution to the report and to the debate. So, Barbara, do you have the result? Seems like 51 against 49. I don't know about that. I question that. But I have my view that unless we do something, thank you very much, Barbara, unless we do something radical, unless we get our act together, unless we actually, showcase the best example, unless we get ourselves close to be at the table, not only be at the table, but be part of the conversation, unless we try to show off innovative and creative thinking that we've actually done before and learn from the past, so that the comment about, for us to, to recognize and to rethink and renew, unless we do all those things, that we're going to have difficulties to make sure we achieve the sustainability development goal. A lot of subjects and topics being mentioned today. I hear that we need to be ambassador. I hear that we need to look at FIDIC as a global forum and a platform to debate and to engage with different stakeholders. And I hear that we need to use the contract as a form of tool to encourage investors to de-risk their project. But the key point for me is, as we move towards COP26, is that we do have an industry which is ready to deliver, but we need to work with the right people. So right now, I want to thank our partner, for supporting us in actually, delivering this particular program. I want to thank Graham, who put this together, to all the contributors to the particular program. We do have few of the State of the World report coming. One is building sustainable communities, going digital. Did we convey, did COVID tech, anything else new? Net zero. So what is next, going beyond net zero? My take on it is that there will be more committee webinar coming up in future in October. We will be launching next, State of the World report, which we planned for August. We do it in September. And in September, we are going to be consumed by our Global Infrastructure Conference. If you have not registered, I would encourage you now to go online and register. We have big speakers and we have big agenda that we want to share leading towards COVID, towards the COP26. I want to finish up by saying massive thank you to each and every one of you, to Peter Macy, to Babak, to Stuart, to Eoin, and to Natalie for your contribution to this report and to this particular session. I want to say thank you also to the team behind the scene who are working hard to make sure we can deliver this program. To Barbara, to Chanel, to the rest of the team, thank you very much for all your support. Wherever you are, if you are having summer, please be careful, follow the direction, and make sure you follow the requirement in terms of COVID protection. I understand third or fourth wave is coming through, so please stay safe. And for those who haven't registered, I'm putting the last plug in. Register for the FIDIC conference in September. And I say thank you very much. Wherever you are, stay safe and God bless you. Thank you.